Hey guys, so for the past few videos, we've been talking about this thing called truth. And in the last video, we talked about different types of claims. And when we talked about the different types of claims, we explained how the type of a claim was determined by A, the type of thing the claim is about, and B, how one would go about verifying or falsifying the claim. And we decided that there were these claims that were called empirical, these other ones that were rational, and these ones that were value based. So, a concept that's related to all this stuff is the concept of knowledge. Once again, a word that we use all the time, that we understand in some basic sense, but that maybe we're not quite clear about. So, logicians, epistemologists, philosophers in general love talking about truth. They love talking about knowledge. And so the goal of this video is to kind of we're not making it up, to explain to you guys the working definition of knowledge that has been established within the history of philosophy. And then to talk about the different types of knowledge there are. And all of this, as you will see, is going to directly relate to that stuff we talked about last week regarding modes of verification and the type of thing something is about. So, to start, what is knowledge? We all say we know certain things. We all say we don't know other things. We say that other people know things and don't know things, right? Now, at a base level, if I asked you to stop and think about that, what do you mean? What do you mean when you say that you or someone else knows or doesn't know something? And you might come up with something like, oh, it's having information, or oh, it's proving something. And all of these things are part of it, I would say, but we might be missing, the how do we say, the total core of what knowledge is. So, first of all, when you say that you know something, you're always talking about a claim, right? Like if you say, I know that leaves fall from trees in fall, right? I know that when you touch a hot stove, you get burned. I know that humans need oxygen in order to survive. I know that 2 plus 2 is 4, right? All of those things involve claims. And another way of talking about this is to say that all of those things involve beliefs. So what we're going to do right now is go through 3, let's call them conditions, that are required for the presence of knowledge. Now, all 3 of these conditions are going to be necessary, meaning that you can't have knowledge without all of them. But they're only going to be jointly sufficient, meaning each one in particular is not enough to grant you knowledge, but all 3 taken collectively are sufficient for the presence of knowledge. So, what does knowledge require, first of all? Well, like we said, it requires a belief. You must have a belief. If there is no belief involved, then you're not talking about knowledge. I don't even know what you're talking about, right? But the question is belief in itself sufficient for knowledge? And this relates to something we talked about in the first video when we talked about truth and the objectivity of truth and how truth is truth independent of your feelings about it. So the answer to the question is no, belief is not in itself sufficient for knowledge, because you could have a belief that's wrong. You could believe that you know something, but actually you don't. Like, I could say, I believe that, say something crazy, like, and we're going to do this later in the semester, I believe that lizard Illuminati control the world. I mean, like, you don't know that, right? That's certainly a belief that you have, but you don't know that. Or if I say, I believe that 2 plus 2 is 5. That's a belief, but it's not knowledge. So try and think about why those things aren't knowledge. They're beliefs. And what are they missing? And you probably come up with something like this. The belief has to be true. So the reason that you don't have knowledge that the lizard Illuminati controls the world is because it's not true. The reason you don't have knowledge that 2 plus 2 is 5 is because it's not true. So knowledge isn't just any belief, it is a specific kind of belief, a true belief, right? A false belief is not knowledge. Now you could have a true belief about something being false, and that's knowledge. Like, I know that 2 plus 2 is 5 is wrong, right? I know that 2 plus 2 isn't 5, right? You can know that something is false, but that's still a true belief. It's not a false belief, right? It's a true belief about a belief being false. Okay, knowledge maybe is a true belief. Interesting. Well, let's think about this. Let's say there are a couple examples we can use to convey this. Here's the one I always use. Let's say you woke up one day in a random room, and forget about like why you're there or how weird this is, but you wake up in a room, and this room has no windows, no doors. It's just concrete. You don't have a phone, you don't have a computer, you don't have access to any information except your immediate surroundings, and you can't talk to anyone, right? Now you're in this room, and then you hear a voice over the loudspeaker. It says, "Is it raining right now?" Now you have no idea whether it's raining right now because you don't know what day it is. You don't know when you put in here. You don't have any mode of checking the weather. But let's say you just said, "I believe it is raining outside." Now, lo and behold, it is raining outside, right? The voice confirms to you. So there, you have a true belief. But did you know that it was raining outside? No. And this is kind of complicated because it tells us that while knowledge involves true belief, knowledge is not merely true belief. Because there are cases in which your belief is true, but you don't have knowledge, right? I feel like there are other examples of this. Like you bought a lottery ticket and you said, "Hey, I'm going to win big with this." And let's say you do win big with the lottery ticket, with the scratchy. You didn't know that you were going to win big. You just believed you did, and the belief happened to be true. So accidental correctness, we could say, is not the same thing as knowledge. So what's missing? If you have a belief and it's true, but it's not always knowledge, what's the thing that's missing? The thing is justification. And sorry, by the way, in advance, just to kind of pause for a second, if you hear a cat crying, because my neighbors, for some reason, have a cat that's very vocal. Hopefully you don't hear a squealing cat right now. But your true belief has to be justified in order for knowledge to exist. And this makes sense, right? Because in the case of the guessing it's raining in the mysterious room, you say, oh, you had a belief that was true, but this belief wasn't justified. In other words, you had no good reason for believing it. Or in the case of winning the $1 million lottery ticket, you were right, but you had no good reason to believe that you were going to win big on the scratchy ticket. Let's look at an example. Let's say I put my pencil behind my computer, right? And then now I say, I believe that my pencil is behind the computer. Is that a true belief? Well, let's see. Yes, it is true. Why did I think that? Well, I thought it because I put it there just a few seconds ago, and I have no reason to believe that the laws of physics changed or that the pencil fell off the desk. So not only is my belief true, but the true belief is justified. I had good reason to believe that the pencil was still there, right? That is justified true belief. Or let's say you have a little kid running around saying, like a 5-year-old saying something like 9 times 9 is 81 because they heard someone say it. They know that. It's true, and it's a belief that they have, kind of, but it's not justified, right? The child doesn't have good reason to believe that. They're just parroting something they heard. Or if you read a Snapple fact and it says, I don't know, like fish never blink. I don't know if that's actually true, but let's pretend it is. Do I know that fish never blink? No, I have no good reason to believe it other than the Snapple cap told me, which is not the same thing. So knowledge isn't actually just having information, right? As we mentioned in the beginning of class, as maybe you would have thought prior to talking about this stuff. So you not only need to have a true belief, but that true belief needs to be justified, right? You have to have some kind of good reasoning behind the beliefs being true, right? But in the same way, we said that not all claims are equal. Not all knowledge is equal. Just like there were different types of claims, there are different types of knowledge. And one of the things I hope to show in this video is that these are related, right? The distinction between types of knowledge is very much related to the distinction we made with regard to types of claims. So let's think about this. I'm going to write 2 justified true claims, right? Number 1, we say 2 plus 2 is 4. And the other one, we say, I don't know, what's a good one? So water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. You know this, and you know this, right? You don't just know this because you heard it on a Snapple fact. You hopefully don't just know this because you heard it on a Snapple fact, but you know the reasoning behind it, right? Let's assume you know both these things. What's different about these 2 things you know? Let's think about it. Let's start with this one. How do you know that water freezes at 32 degrees? You might say, oh, well, I was taught that, or that's, how people explain water in a science textbook. I'm like, okay, but how did they figure that out, right? How do people know that water freezes at 32 degrees? And of course, your answer would be something like, well, because they observed it. And not only once, like they observed it a bunch of times, and we're able to make a more general conclusion. Aha. So this one, by contrast, is not like that, right? It's not about observing anything because, as we said in the claim type video, these are abstract ideas, right? So as it turns out, there are words to describe these 2 different types of knowledge. The first type of knowledge, and it's Latin, by the way, is called a priori knowledge. And A space P-R-I-O-R-I, a priori. And the second type of knowledge is called a posteriori. That's P-O-S-T-E-A space P-O-S-T-E-R-I-O-R-I, right? What is the difference between these 2 things? Well, first of all, it's important to understand that the word a, it's not like the. Like, you know how you say a cup, a market? That's not this. This isn't a priori. It's a priori, right? So it goes back to Latin, and this means something like from the before, right? And that's easy to understand because prior, right? Prior, before. And this one, by contrast, means like from the after, right? Or from whatever what follows or something like that. But be careful. People make the mistake in assuming that this means, so this means knowledge you knew already, and this means knowledge that you gained. No. Because sometimes, take a claim like the sky is blue. You say, oh, well, I already knew that, so that's a priori knowledge. No. A priori knowledge does not equal prior knowledge. Because, like, this is prior knowledge you had too, right? You didn't just learn this. So, the sky is blue is actually a posteriori knowledge. Or something like leaves turn orange in the fall. Those are all examples of a posteriori knowledge. Now, why? Why? Well, let me keep writing examples, and I want to see if you pick up on it. So 2 plus 2 is 4 is an example of a priori knowledge. So is all bachelors are unmarried. Okay, let's do one more. And I'll go back to one we used in a previous video. All triangles have 3 sides. What's the difference between these two? What do all of these claims have in common that these claims do not have in common? And conversely, what do all these claims have in common that does not apply to these guys? And the difference is that if you look at all of these claims, you know them prior to sensory verification. In other words, you don't know this by going out and looking at stuff or perceiving stuff. You know this by merely thinking about the definitions of words and the relations between definitions. Sound familiar? Conversely, you know these things only after sensory verification. Because you only know that water freezes at a certain temperature because observation. You only know the sky is blue through observation. You only know that leaves turn orange in the fall because observation, because of experience, right? Then you may be thinking, wait, but like, aren't these so, isn't the definition of the sky include the word blue? No. No, it's just that it's so familiar that it seems like it's part of some initial definition, but it's definitely not like these kinds of things. So what's the parallel here? What does the distinction between a priori knowledge and a posteriori knowledge sound like? Rational, empirical. Remember we said rational claims are claims about concepts and definitions, and you can only verify or falsify them by thinking about those things, whereas empirical claims were about external phenomena, and you verify or falsify them by going out into the world and checking, right? That parallel is here. Notice how all the a priori knowledge is like rational knowledge. And then by contrast, all of the a posteriori knowledge is empirical knowledge. And that's not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence at all. This like rational empirical distinction is actually very prevalent within the history of metaphysics and epistemology, which are like two main branches of philosophy. And it's not always this clean, because sometimes you could have a priori knowledge based on like little bits of a posteriori knowledge, right? So for example, if you know that my dog is in front of my house, and if you know that I live on Poplar Street, then you would follow that you would know that my dog is on Poplar Street, right? Or something like that. And that's a priori knowledge because you're working from the claims to come to a conclusion, which we haven't talked about, by the way. And that's a priori knowledge in some sense, right? So forget about these hair splittings that come into the mix when we're talking about multiple claims. Just think about individual claims for now. And if you do that, you'll see that a priori knowledge is rational knowledge, or in other words, knowledge that is obtained merely by the faculty of reasoning without reference to sensory stuff, whereas a posteriori knowledge is knowledge you have only after reference to the sensory stuff and verification. So at the end of the day, this is all we need to know for now, right? You know what knowledge is. It's a justified true belief. And you can see that the true beliefs can be justified in different ways. They can be justified purely rationally, or they can be justified empirically. So in a similar way to how the claim type is determined by the mode of verification, the knowledge type too is determined by the mode of justification. So that's basically it for today. And as always, in addition to contacting me, which I always encourage, you could look this stuff up, right? I gave you those supplementary resources on the syllabus, like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, or even just basic stuff like YouTube, right? If you search a priori knowledge, a posteriori knowledge, you're going to get like thousands and thousands and thousands of hits, because we've been talking about this for a very long time in philosophy. It's not just something random that I'm telling you guys, but there are tons and tons and tons of resources that can help with videos and examples and all that, in addition to the stuff we're doing in class. So that is it for today, guys. I'll see you around.